Thank you for joining us at the 12th edition of Expo Chicago. My name is Taylor Payton. I assist our artistic director, Kate Sears-Patowski, in planning the panels for dialogues. It's a great pleasure to welcome you today to the dialogue stage, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. The dialogue stage offers provocative artistic discourse with leading artists, curators, designers, and arts professionals on current issues that engage them. This afternoon, I'm very excited to welcome an outstanding group of curatorial visionaries whose work shapes the global contemporary art landscape. With experience spanning major institutions and experimental spaces, each curator offers a unique perspective on presenting art across diverse, cultural, and geopolitical contexts. It is my great pleasure and quite an honor to introduce the following panelists. Donald R. Mullen, Jr., Director and Chief Curator of Highline Art, and the curator of the 12th Site Santa Fe International, Cecilia Alemani. Chief Curator and Director of the Renaissance Society, Myriam Salah, and Head of Exhibitions at the Wexner Center, Julieta González, as well as our wonderful moderator, Renaud Proch, who's the Executive and Artistic Director of Independent Curators International, which is our decades-long collaborator on the Curatorial Forum. I'll now hand it off to Renaud to get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Yes, round of applause for our... Thank you so much, Taylor. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. There it is. Thank you so much for joining us today for this panel looking at curating the international. So let's hope to understand what that international is by the end of the hour. Thank you so much, Cecilia, Myriam, and Julieta for joining me on this panel today. As a way to introduce each of you, we wanted to go through a couple of images that you brought with you of past projects. And those images will be circling on the screen behind you through the talk, but I thought that perhaps we could start with the first one, and the curator who chose that image can explain what we're looking at. Cecilia.
Oh. Sorry. Hello, everyone. This is a picture of a current exhibition that we have on the High Line. As you heard, I work as a chief curator of the High Line in New York, which is a public park. I've been there for many, many years, and we do a very international program on the High Line. I think you might have a bunch of pictures here. We are very proud of commissioning and producing new works that you see on the park along the mile-and-a-half length of the park. And in topic of what we're talking today, what's been very interesting and challenging for me as a curator is to think about how to reconcile the fact that you're, of course, in New York City, in one of the most important capitals for contemporary art, but at the same time, you have an audience of 7 million people and more that come from all over the world. And so how you can sort of make sure that the program is both relevant for the local community, but also for the international visitors that come. So that's, you know, we try to strike a good balance between these two kind of polarities.
Thank you.
More pictures, a highline in bloom. Yeah. And this is, yeah, so this is, I'm going to very briefly talk about 3 projects. So you heard about the Highline. These are stills from a movie that inspired a biennial that I'm about to curate called the 12th Santa Fe International. It's going to open at the end of June, and that's why you don't really see lots of pictures, because the show has not been installed yet, but the title of the show comes from a wonderful video by Godfrey Reggio called Once Within a Time. And I wanted to bring this example, and we'll talk probably later, because it is an international exhibition. It's called The International, but it's very much rooted and grounded in Santa Fe and in New Mexico. So thinking about the challenges of thinking both of, you know, the artists, but also of the audience. It's a very unique exhibition in the sense that it has global ambition to represent sort of the global art scene, but in a very specific, unique space like New Mexico. And then the third pictures that you see, this is an exhibition that I curated a few years ago, the Venice Biennale number 59. And here's
That exhibition.
that exhibition, yes. And you'll see a bunch of pictures. Of course, this is a completely different exhibition in terms of scale and history and size. But very similarly to what I always think about on the Highland is how do you define actually the audience that come to an exhibition like that? Of course, all of us think about the professional artists and art world, but this is an exhibition that goes way beyond the art professionals. And so how do you make an exhibition relevant for the international community, but also an exhibition that makes sense for the people that live in Venice and that go and see it throughout the 7 months of the show.
Thank you, Cecilia. Couple more.
Almost done. So weird to see these pictures with nobody in. It doesn't really happen
Very
often.
ghostly. And then we move to Myriam, Made in LA.
This would be me, yes. Made in LA 2020 is the Made in LA that no one ever saw because it was the COVID Made in LA. Now, I think it's interesting to bring up Made in LA in this context because it's the opposite of curating internationally. It's actually curating extremely locally, since the whole exhibition is meant to center artists from in and around Los Angeles. And in terms of process, it's a biennial for which myself and my co-curator, Lauren Mackler and Ike Onyueni, did around 300 studio visits in about a year. And what we noticed is that we didn't want the exhibition to have the sense of, oh, there is this scene in LA, or there's, kind of a common thread in artists' practice, because throughout these 300 studio visits, we thought that there was an insane amount of diversity, actually. And we were not in the, LA of the 70s, where you had the color arts generation and all the conceptual artists, or the influence of John Baldessari that you could really feel through the practice of a lot of people. And so instead of doing a survey of what art is in LA, we decided to really make it into a group show and to work through a few conceptual threads, which were entertainment and how artists relate to entertainment in a city as like LA, the genre of horror movies and how horror movies permeate art production in a certain way, and then the relationship to fiction and like breaking the fourth wall. And it was also interesting because it was a Made in LA that happened across the city in 2 locations, at the Hammer Museum on the west side of Los Angeles and at the Huntington Library on the east side of Los Angeles, 2 completely different contexts. But yeah, all of this to say that it was how to make the local relevant at in and of itself. That it doesn't have to be LA vernacular to be made in LA, maybe.
Thank you.
Yeah, also a lot of pictures, since this was at the Huntington Library, so 2 very different locations, as I was mentioning.
Okay. And then the Renaissance Society?
And then the Renaissance Society. It's a good segue, actually, because some of the artists in Made in LA ended up having exhibitions at the Renaissance Society. I would say that the process is quite different because projects at the REN really come from long-term conversations and relationship that sometimes really take years and end up in a new commission in our space. There's something interesting about the REN because we are both very anchored in Chicago. We're really a Chicagoan institution, and even our location at the 4th floor of an academic building in Hyde Park really makes us extremely of our place. But at the same time, and that's something that Suzanne Guez used to say when she was a director, she said that we have an off-the-plane kind of audience. So a lot of people come from out of town or from even out of the country to see exhibitions at the RAN. And so I think we constantly try to balance those ethos, which are actually not even in opposition in any way. We work with artists who are based in Chicago, but not because they're based in Chicago, because we think they're great artists and that they happen to be based in Chicago. So there's also this need, I think, to not create a dichotomy between local and international. It's just one program, and some things happen to be around us already. So, of course, they get integrated in the program. And I would say that one important thing at the RAN is really to create a curatorial dialogue and kind of build a sense of trust with the artists so that they feel very free to make their craziest projects.
Thank you. I'll speed through those. They'll come back. And Julieta. Oh.
Thank you for the invitation and good afternoon. So I was asked for slides of recent shows, so I kind of started in 2020. But it's been kind of roller coaster ride for the past 5 years. So I've been in different places, in and out. So being mostly a foreigner everywhere, as Adriano's biennial. So this was a show that was organized with MASPI, but it was very different from the one at MASPI because MASPI is the Museo de Arte de São Paulo, and it was a museum organized by, designed by Lina Bobardi, where she actually also did many shows. So we did an exhibition devoted to Lina, which was at MASPI, Jumex, and then it was slated to travel to MCA Chicago because we were co-curators, Jose Esparza Choncuy, Tomas Toledo and Adriano Pedrosa, and myself. So these are just some slides of the show, and with the exhibition designed by Frida Escobedo, who now everyone knows is the architect of the new Met Wing. And these are other shows such as Pedro Reyes, which I did at Marco in Monterrey, which is more participatory exhibition as well, with some group dynamics originated by the works. But really, what I wanted to talk about was maybe the last slides, which are, so here, so talking about this idea of the local and the international, for example, this was a show that I co-curated with Rodrigo Moura at El Museo del Barrio. And the Museo del Barrio is the definition of a very local museum. It's a museum that was founded actually by Ralph Montañez Ortiz, who is the artist who was the subject of this exhibition. And it was a museum also founded to cater to a very local community. So this was local as local can get. But Ralph was a very international artist. So there was this big contrast because he was part of the destruction art movement in the 60s. So he defines what this idea of the transnational. So when I was invited to do the show, I proposed to Rodrigo that we do a show of his work in context. So we show as well these different contexts that he moved around. So it was not only about his work, but also showing the relation of his work to other artists of his generation. So we had a room like with Eduardo Paolozzi, I remember I wanted John McHale, but we couldn't find the work. And other different artists who also, Gustav Metzger, who participated in the Destruction in Art Symposium. And these are some of the pieces that Ralph made. So that was an interesting, again, case of contrasting this idea of the international with the local, but also the problem of inscription and how an artist, because of his Puerto Rican heritage perhaps and his grounding in that specific community of El Barrio in New York, never really had the critical reappraisal that his work demanded as well. So the idea was also to contextualize him as a precursor to some of the shifts and turns that we've been seeing today in terms of this idea of decolonization, but also how this translates to recognition of other forms of knowledge, other epistemologies, indigenous epistemologies, but also art as a form of healing, which was a very crazy theory he had, which was called physio-psychoalchemy. And he did his doctoral thesis at Rutgers University on that, and it's really a trip. So he was doing breathing exercises and as performance art in the 1980s. So we wanted to show how his work could be contextualized within all of these different international movements. And the last slides are, I worked briefly at Inhotim in Belo Horizonte, in Brumadinho, in Minas Gerais, in Brazil. So Inhotim is a very large open-air museum which basically screamed millions of dollars because everything is huge and has cost a lot of money, and was made as a museum that really had all, it's a private museum, so it has these very impressive pavilions, and by the one you saw before is like Matthew Barney, but they have the other Varejão pavilion. And when I got there, there had been this contract with the IPEAFRO, which is the Institute of, for the Study of Afro-Brazilian Culture, founded by Abdias Nascimento. And it was a program that was kind of alien to whatever Inhotim had been. And they did a first show in Abdias, which is very thinly, how would I say, scripted, in the sense that it dealt with the friendship of Abdias to the father of Tunga, who has two pavilions at Inhotim. So what I proposed was to really go into the archive, and this was not what Inhotim had ever done. But this demanded not only going into the archive, but thinking about the local community. So I think this has been the instance in my life where the international and the local collided in different ways. I was not really familiarized with his work and his life, and this figure was really amazing, a Pan-Africanist thinker, activist, also a painter, writer, and playwright. And among the things that I discovered was his relation with Augusto Boal. So everyone knows Augusto Boal as the father of the Theater of the Oppressed. Actually, Augusto Boal was the disciple of Abdias Nascimento, and he had his start in the Black Theater of Abdias, which did psychodrama, which was a form of theater invented by a psychoanalyst called Jacob Levi Moreno. And this was in the 40s. So this was a show, a very document-heavy show that delved into the archives of both Abdias and Augusto, charting that history and rewriting this genealogy of the theater of the oppressed. But on the other hand, this work was done also for the communities around Inhotim, in Brumadinho, mostly Quilombola communities. Quilombos were originally communities of escaped slaves who got together when they escaped and had these self-sufficient and self-organized societies. And they even battled the bandeirantes and people who went to, try to subvert, to break apart these communities. And then they became agricultural communities, quite isolated sometimes in rural areas. So most of these people from the Quilombola communities work at Inhotim, and that's Rosimara. So I started talking to them and went to their Quilombo, where they had this work that was made by Charlie Ahern and Rigoberto Torres, who actually have a work around here at the fair. And we began talking about doing a book, because they were losing their knowledge. The young people were just on their phones. They thinking that all of this knowledge was going to be lost at some point. So I said, well, why don't we do a book? We think about oral histories, but also why don't we put it in writing and set it in, for the future. So we started this dynamic, which ended in this book, which unfortunately I did not do and was not credited for, but I started it. And it was all the 4 quilombos around Brumadinho. And these are just pictures of the dynamics. It was the first workshop that we did after that photo.
Great.
And yeah.
So we're happy to
Yes.
give you the credit, or give you this platform to associate the credit with the book today. Thank you, Julieta. And I wanted to, I think there's some more images, but they'll now just start cycling, if that's possible. Thank you. I wanted to, we will get into the relationship between local communities and international practice, and I think we've already seen in the slides and the projects that you presented some examples of how this works and where the tensions might arise or when the opportunities might arise. But I want to maybe just take a slight step back and ask you, or ask either of you, to comment on this idea of foreigners everywhere, or this idea of the plane spectatorship. And in many ways, I think we represent here on this panel a kind of the plane situation where we're all working in the US and in American institutions, but our background is from other places around the world. And we represent a sort of international practice also, having worked in different places. I wanted to ask you how that shapes your curatorial practice, what you bring to each exhibition and to your situations locally here in the States, from past experiences and your international experiences.
No, sorry.
Myriam?
Yeah, I'll start. It's a tough question, but I would say I've always been a foreigner during my career. I was a foreigner when I started in France because I came from Tunisia, and then I was a foreigner in the US because I came from France. I find it very enriching because you get into a place and you're already shaped by multiple languages and multiple frames of thinking, and it might make one sensitive to how meaning is structured and how it can be flattened very easily. And I would say that the thing that struck me in the US is, you think we live in this globalized world and that we're all very Americans already, but then you start working here and you realize that, no, there is a culture clash. And to me, in our profession, I think the question of representation has been something that I found quite striking here in America, where there is a pressure towards clarity, where artists are kind of asked to define themselves or to identify themselves. And yeah, that shapes practices in a certain way. There is an essay that I always come back to, and I really recommend to everyone, that Sohrab Mohabi had written for his show at Sculpture Center, Searching the Sky for Rain. And he talks about this, he really articulates really well the way, especially in America, artists are asked to be illustratives, of their cultures, and that there is, in a way, a right to abstraction or a right to disengage from the burden of representation that I find really powerful and very, very relevant to the context in which we work here. And so, yeah, I feel like I've been approaching my practice a lot through, I don't know, the words of Edouard Glissant around opacity, or the words of Fred Moten around being fugitive, and sort of trying to escape boxes and packaging artists. And yeah, that's it.
I don't know if Julieta or Cecilia, you would like to comment on this?
Just briefly, like Myriam, I also am a foreigner here. I've been here for many, many years, in spite of my accent, which I'm still very proud of having. But I still feel very much Italian, although my entire career has been mostly in the United States. And I think I would say what has helped me being a foreigner is keeping in mind that not everything comes through the States. Sometimes, especially living in a place like New York City, you assume that as one of the best capitals for contemporary art, everything comes through the galleries, through museums. Every single artist wants to live there. And you have this assumption that everything is within reach. But actually, of course, it's not. You know, it's very, very interesting to, and of course, I'm fortunate to be able to travel a lot and to see, you know, very different realities across the ocean, and also working on exhibitions that are in very different places. It really has taught me to keep, you know, my mind open. And like Myriam was saying, there is a certain tendency in this country of boxing people and identity, and that's something that I ended up doing a lot, because it's you know, it's hard to escape, but it's also very much a sort of an American mentality. So I try to kind of zoom out of that very often.
I've only been here for 6 months, so
Welcome.
How do you feel about
And
that?
also, thank you. And good luck.
thank you. So I can't really speak much to the experience, even though I've lived in the U.S., but I really haven't worked here. So this is a new thing for me. I think that, well, I've been a foreigner since I left my country in 2002 and 2003. So I'm Venezuelan, and I think always I've been interested in this idea of the transnational and of the exchanges. So I think that's something that I will hopefully bring to the work. Who knows in this context that we're living now what will happen, but hopefully I won't be deported.
We don't want that. Building on this idea of the transnational, which I think is very important, and going back to the question of a local audience and international projects, international art being shown, I wanted us to think a little bit also about complicating that relationship. And I think we see it in the projects that you've already talked about and presented to us today. But I just want to refer to a talk that Miranda Lash gave yesterday as part of the Building a Cathedral conference upstairs, where she spoke about Prospect 6, another international exhibition in New Orleans, and really discussing the transnationality of the city itself and how each neighborhood told a part of the story of New Orleans, which was really a global history, right? And in your work, in your marrying of the local and the global, how do you I guess, handle or care for or hold this relationship? And how do you understand the local place that you work in? Especially, Myriam, maybe we can work with you, because I think it's really interesting that the two projects that you presented are absolutely rooted in a local space, but they have international, global ambitions, and certainly global visibility.
Yeah, I guess I will start with a segue to what Cecilia was saying earlier, and a little shout out to Chicago, because I feel like in Chicago, contrary to New York, because the city is a little bit off-center, there is a lot of curiosity, and I think the audience is very aware that not all artists come through here, or not all art is here. So I think there is really quite an openness that's really great to have in terms of the audience. I would say that for the Renaissance Society in particular, I don't necessarily focus on, I want to show artists, international artists or foreign artists. I think the effort has to be put on the research, and one has to be looking everywhere and kind of yeah, that involves travel, but not necessarily. It also involves reading, watching, looking, hearing, listening, being curious, and then bringing things here without necessarily presenting them with that distance of like, this is not from here. I think there is a trust that needs to be had in the audience, and I think it's important to talk up to the audience as well, because people can, appreciate lots of things. So again, yeah, maybe this idea of how we present these different exhibitions is also quite crucial. And yeah, it's interesting because I had heard about the Renaissance Society before having set foot in Chicago ever. So there is definitely a presence of this place in the world, and I think it comes from that. It comes from working with artists from all over, but without ever creating this kind of how do you say that? It's kind of separation between what's Chicago or what's not, you know?
How do you balance the...
I would just think about the two most recent exhibitions that I've been working on. On one side, the Venice Biennale, which is a very historical institution and has a very clear mission, right? Like, it is an international biennial. It is really much grounded in the idea of nations and countries through the pavilion. So that DNA is there. It's really, really hard to escape. I think, what Adriano did in the last biennial was really remarkable. However, the mission itself remains very much grounded in this international or global reach, right? You go to Venice and you think you're going to see kind of the best of the last 5 years of our production, which I try, to kind of not follow as a guideline, but it is, I think, the aura of that exhibition. And now that I'm curating a very different biennial in Santa Fe, I think it was really stimulating to kind of change gear, and instead of thinking about your job as a curator that is to go and discover talents everywhere in the world and travel so much, it's about being able to make an exhibition that makes sense in the space where it's staged. And it can still be international. It is called international. It can be global. We have lots of artists coming from abroad, but it's an exhibition that is very much grounded in the territory and in the city. And to do so, I kind of changed gear. Instead of thinking about going and approaching this exhibition with an idea or a concept, I really try to learn from within and focus rather than on a theme, but on the history of Santa Fe and New Mexico, history told through individuals and the life of people that have left a mark on Santa Fe. So there isn't necessarily a theme, but as you will walk through the show, you will learn, of course, about contemporary art, but also about a number of individuals that can be real or fictional. They can be a contemporary, or maybe they lived 500 years ago, whose life story and kind of existential experience is going to be woven through the tapestry of the exhibition. So thinking about how you can anchor a show within the community.
And so in order to do that, a lot of the curatorial research that goes on, I assume, has to focus on the city of Santa Fe in this case, on the local space. How do you engage in this?
Well, one of the ideas that we had was to expand the exhibition. So the exhibition is promoted and takes place in an institution that is called SITE, and SITE is the core of the exhibition. At the same time, we wanted to spread the exhibition in other venues and other institutions. Santa Fe is an incredibly rich culturally as a city. There are incredible museums and institutions. Historically, lots of incredible artists have moved there. And so we wanted to tap onto that richness. And so as you will explore the exhibition, you will go to museums or weird places like a weed store or like a toy store, and you will see art there. At the same time, hopefully, you will also learn the different layers of the society and culture in that place. And I think Santa Fe is an incredible place. but I hope the exhibition will also be a way for the audience to see their own city from the perspective of art and artists.
And Julieta, same sort of question. How did you proceed to learn and engage with the local community in your team? And what brought you to sort of to connect them and their interests with the work that you showed?
Well, one thing was also thinking about the audiences, because it's a place that attracts a very specialized international audience, but it also attracts tourists, sort of this Jurassic part of art. But then it's also grounded in a community that has gone through very big traumas. There was this horrific tailings dam failure that it was a flood that killed like 400 people, and that was in 2019.
Mudslide, yeah.
And so there were many scars in the place, but also this idea, how do you work for the local public? And the local public, which is also the ones who work there. So that was interesting for me. And
But how did it, say more about it. How did it?
well, it came out because I started talking to the cleaning ladies, and I befriended them, and they were interested that there was a show about a black man, and they didn't know about him, and they wanted to understand why this place that wasn't clearly for them, because they always felt that it wasn't for them, was who was this black man? Who was this Abdias? So we started with the library that we did. It was empty, so I called Jaime Laureano, and he designed this library, which had all of these books from different black authors, etc., and had the shape of a terreiro. So again, the architecture of the place had to be something, a furniture that was familiar to the spaces that they also could inhabit as a culture. So it started like that, and then from the books, it went to the book. And then this idea of organizing everything that they had, like, but their oral histories and the photographs that they had and the documents that they had. And this was something that, for example, I did in Puerto Rico. I was invited to this very crazy project in 2004, where we worked with a community in a little town called Rincon. And there were people from everywhere. This was organized by Michi Marzuach, who I think you know, and Pablo León de la Barra, who was also he designed this campsite where we all stayed, and it was designed as an Olympics. So there were people from all over the world who descended on this little town, and we did things like in the shops, everything without any money. And it was a very interesting way of working, because really no one saw the show, but the locals did, and it created some kind of mark there, in a way. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, it sort of takes it answers my question, and it begs another one in a sense, because you're describing a project that you feel very few people saw, certainly few people internationally, but we are here on a fairly international stage, and you're able to talk about it and to refer to it. So I'm curious about also your position as international curators, with an access to visibility, to dissemination of information, to access to an established art world, contemporary art worlds that is global, that is very well connected. You have the power to bring visibility to certain practices, whether they're truly international exhibitions or small international exhibitions in Ricon. How do you approach that responsibility? Whoever.
Julieta, we're looking at you. I mean, it's a complex question, because I don't think there is a rule, right? I mean, right now I work in a very popular place like the High Line, and it's the fact that we have a built-in audience is what I'm given. You know, I wish I could. I wish there could be less people, but it's still a lot. So in a way, it's. I think it's about what you think is meaningful for that institution and for that exhibition. I don't think it's about numbers or quotas or people or artists. That those calculations are always very tricky and misleading. But I think as curators, our job is to make the artists' visions possible and commission and produce works by them. So, of course, some artists are very excited to work within a global and international platform. But there are also many artists who love working very locally in the community, and it doesn't matter if you don't have an article in the New York Times the following day. So I really think artists should be our compass, and they really help us kind of guide us through these very complicated issues and questions.
Great.
Yeah, I was also going to say that I think it's important to look at things the other way around also, where asking ourselves the question, what does it mean for this artist coming from that place to land here? And the current show that we have at the Renaissance Society, the artists came from Uganda, Kampala, and it's just not, there's a, how do I put it? We can't be inviting people from all over the world, but then trying to integrate them in a very American system right away. So I think there has to be, we have a responsibility to be the in-between, to create, to be hosts, actually, really. I think hosting is an important part of being a curator, especially in this international context, to, sort of create bridges between different ways of working, of thinking, and create interactions with the more direct context. So for us, our first, our built-in audience are the students, but we're also in Hyde Park on the south side of Chicago. So there's also the question of like, how do we exist in there, and how do the artists we bring from outside exist there? And I have to say, really the lesson in terms of bridging the local and the international that we've seen lately is we took our board to Ghana, and we went to visit Ibrahim Mahama in Tamale. And while we were there, it was our group of American, patrons, collectors, and then these teenagers, school kids from the local school in Tamale. And Ibrahim wanted everyone to do the same visit and to talk about art in the same way. And I felt like it was an exercise in audience engagement that was really incredible, very inspiring.
Fantastic. I want to maybe ask a last question and then throw it to the audience, but I don't want to skirt around the established idea of what an international exhibition is, and the sort of big biennial, or whether it's Venice or Site Santa Fe or Made in LA also, it doesn't have to be international in its makeup of artists, but international in its exposure, let's say. And I think our work as curators has been shaped by international exhibitions, especially of the 90s, which brought to our consciousness work from around the world and really forced us to develop a language that could hold these different practices together. And that, to me, really defines contemporary curatorial practice. But I've been asking myself over the last few years what the role of these large international exhibitions are today. What the role of these exhibitions is today. If they still serve this this role of a platform of curiosity, of a platform of access to different ways of working, if they feed, if it challenge us to think differently about what art practice is. And as curator of one or two very, very large such biennials, but also just as curators in general, how you approach these these biennials and large institutions, large exhibitions. I'm very curious what your
Just
thoughts
say
are.
that people love to hate biennials, but there's nothing bad about them. And it's, yes, of course, there has been an explosion of shows in the 1990s. Site was created as a biennial in 1995, before it even was an institution itself. So, but as a curator, I think they're incredibly important in the ecosystem of art these days, for a simple reason also that I learn a lot from these shows. And if I go to Taipei to see the biennial, I know that I'm going to learn about practices that I had no idea before. And it's curated probably by a wonderful colleague or curator that has allowed me to also experience the local art scene in a way that is curated, and it's already prepared for the kind of fruition. So I think there is, and then on the side of the artists, I think these are incredible platforms to give visibility to practices that might be very well rooted in the local, but aspire to be also very international.
And Myriam, Julieta, like as curators, has that the importance of those biennials changed over the years for you?
Yeah, well, I agree with Cecilia. I think these are, I mean, it's amazing to have a concentration of art from all over the world in a space. That in itself is great. I think we've been asking too much of biennials, maybe. I feel like every time it's like biennials will save the world or something. You know, there's something that's a little bit too much. And I feel like in response, a lot of these shows have also adopted a progressive language, you know, or like have been talking about, justice or sort of like causes, and not necessarily focusing on the art. I think it was Jason Farago who wrote a review of the last Venice Biennial and said, we've gotten very good at critique, but we haven't been able to change the structures that are behind that. You know, we haven't found a new model to respond to that critique. So yeah, I think because we expect too much of these biennials, maybe sometimes, again, artists become too tied to certain themes or are being asked to represent. And I think if we got rid of that tacit commission almost, we would have better exhibitions. And I think Cecilia did that really beautifully in Venice. I think the last Carnegie Biennial did that also very beautifully, to just let the art be. Let the art be.
Well, I haven't really been involved in very large shows, although I worked at Insight San Diego Tijuana in 2005, and then, but I do think those shows are very relevant. It's big international shows, and as Cecilia and Myriam said, they're an opportunity also to see art from everywhere in one place, and usually with a very interesting discourse around it. And going back to your biennial, Cecilia, what I found very beautiful about it was the fact that it was as if you had asked a question, you know, it was historical as well, but it was how would art history have been if it had been told from this other perspective, you know? And it's a perspective that is not in the books, but it is there, and you showed that art very beautifully going back in history. So it was not just about the new, it was about reframing and rethinking the whole, even art history itself. So I think that those things can happen in these shows.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions from the audience.
Hi, thank you so much for that discussion. I guess this is a question in response to something, Myriam, that you said about your interest in opacity and fugitivity. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to maybe other ways to think about obscuring the kind of difference between the local and the translocal, even something as simple as like leaving the birthplace off of an artist's, like of the label, as an artist myself, sometimes I like leaving dates off of things to take that. So I was just wondering if you could all speak a little bit more to, if you've thought about these other ways to kind of think about blurring that line and maybe helping artists not get put in a representative box or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. And I thought about it a lot. Actually, when we were working on Made in LA, one of the artists asked us to never mention her date of birth and where she was born. Since I'm not giving her name, I can also say she was born in Iran, and so she simply didn't want her work to be read through the lens of whatever. She's the Iranian artist or the Middle Eastern artist, or, you know. And so I think those are great questions. Should we be obscuring biographical elements from the way we present artists? I think some of them are interesting to the practice sometimes and sort of transpire in it and deserve to be heard. I think others don't make sense. And I also feel like we don't treat all artists the same, where, you know, sometimes you read text and if an artist is American, just gonna read this artist, and then the next line will have this Congolese artist, you know? Why isn't he just the artist too? So, yeah, I think there is a lot of work to be done around maybe language and these sort of practices that became automatic and that, kind of obscure the way that we can perceive an artwork.
Would you like to answer that question also?
I just had, it's a very interesting question because I noticed in the last couple of years that very often reviews of big shows, I think including mine, but a lot of other exhibitions, in the criticism, journalists talk about the labels, which, and for the last one, for Adriano's biennial, everyone was talking about what the label was saying, that it was the first time that this artist was featured in the biennial. And so it's actually, I think it's our fault as curators that we also end up using a lot of jargon and kind of categorizations that cannot escape the identity of an artist, but of course it's very problematic. Wasn't it documented that they listed the artists by time zone where they lived instead of saying, and they just said, well, it's summertime or blah, blah. So I don't know, but that's a kind of silly trick. But it's a very good question. I think as curators, we think a lot about that.
I think also it's like on a case-by-case basis. Sometimes artists actually speak to their own context, and sometimes they don't. And the other day I was in conversation with an artist who said, I don't want any text or anything that is written about my show, and it's an artist we're going to present, to start saying that I am a Black woman. But she works around the ideas of the Caribbean, but around other types of knowledge and materialities, etc. But she said, I really want it not to be about that because I've been typecast as that. So it's different. And then I'm working with a Congolese artist who really wants, Sammy, talking about the Congo. So it depends. And we have that responsibility as curators also to see how we frame things. And personally, I've never liked to do shows of artists from a certain country or something like that because I don't feel I want to also pigeonhole artists into one thing because they were born somewhere or raised somewhere. Yeah.
There we go. Thank you. There's perhaps time for a short question. Yes?
Thank you so much for your great discussions. I hear you are saying that your curatorial practice in local versus international, global frame is not really a dichotomy frame or opposing to each other. And I also see myself, a lot of these contemporary exhibitions, the clarity in cultural specificity or regional specificity is being blurred. But as you commented, most of your audiences are kind of off the plane audiences, that kind of shows that there might be clarity of the class specificity is not getting blurred so much. So as a practice to include more diverse audiences, not for the set audiences you already have, what kind of curatorial strategy do you have?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't say that all our audience was of the plane. I was mentioning a quote by Suzanne Guez, who was saying that part of our audience is off the plane. As I was saying, our built-in audience are also students from the University of Chicago. And then, you know, our space is extremely peculiar because it's not on the street. You have to get to that fourth floor in Cobb Hall and kind of know where you're going in a way. So it's definitely more, it's definitely trickier for us to have traditional audience engagement strategies. However, it's something that we think about quite a lot, and we want to find ways of inhabiting our immediate surroundings in a more relevant way. And so that means starting partnerships with some, schools either in Hyde Park or in the South Side more widely, or, you know, organizing buses that can be coming, doing partnerships with schools that focus on art and on the kind of education of their students through art. And these are all things that we're thinking about and putting in motion slowly, sure, but surely.
So we're coming to the hour already. But before we close, I just want to personally thank each of you, not just for being on this panel, but for all the work that you do and for inspiring us through your projects. Thank you.
Thank you.